his task was to take a whole bunch of Union soldiers to clear the path of Indians, and nothing to do with the South, clear the path of Indians so they could construct the Union Pacific Railroad, which was chartered by Lincoln, the first big federal government chartered railroad, heavily subsidized by the taxpayer. And so he cleared the path. In other words, the Union Pacific Railroad was able to socialize the cost of construction by using the U.S. Army, the conscript army, to wipe out Indians. And then Grenville Dodge, having done his constructive work, retires from the Army and becomes one of the owners of the Union Pacific Railroad. That was the Dodge-Lincoln connection. It was the military-industrial complex at full blast. So, and this is the Republican Party was shot through with this stuff. The whole Lincoln and Grant administration, essentially one big boodle after the other. One big, enormous boodle. Unbelievably racket. Anyway, but his major focus was on forcing a protective tariff. Another reason he got nominated was the Pennsylvania delegation was mostly interested in protective tariff. They, of course, were abolitionists and all that, but their big thing was protective tariff. Pennsylvania was the home of the iron and steel industry from almost, early 1815 on. The iron and steel industry is my least favorite industry in America. It's been always inefficient. Ever since its existence, always calling for protective tariff or subsidies for import quotas, always bowling for federal aid. And so they essentially ran Pennsylvania, the Republican Party. And so since he was a sound on the tariff question, Pennsylvania vote went to Lincoln. And as Lou Rockwell pointed out, the first thing that Lincoln did was Lincoln Congress did was to raise the tariffs to its highest point in American history, the Morrill tariff. And the tariff was raised 10 times after that during the Lincoln administration. And again, on Fort Sumter, interesting enough, as again Lou also pointed out, the point of Fort Sumter was, and Lincoln said in his first inaugural, well, slavery you don't care about. We got to collect those taxes, the southern taxes, you see, from the southern ports. Charleston, New Orleans were the two big southern ports. Fort Sumter was guarding Charleston Harbor, and he wanted to keep Fort Sumter to collect those tariffs. And of course, he then maneuvered the South into firing the first shot on Fort Sumter. But the tariffs and taxes were a key point for Lincoln and the Republican Party. Lying to South Carolina, Abraham Lincoln managed to do what Franklin Roosevelt and Henry Stimson did at Pearl Harbor 80 years later, maneuvering the Southerners into firing the first shot. By doing that, by the way, he ended the idea. There was a strong movement in the Middle North for a third Confederacy. Many of the states, Maryland, much of Pennsylvania, even New York City, Connecticut, they didn't like either side. They wanted to form their own confederation. Get out of the Union. They hated the Yankees too. Everybody hated the Yankees. Get out of Yankeedom. Let them have their damn New England, northern Illinois area. So, unfortunately, by maneuvering the Southerners to firing Fort Sumter, that movement for Third Confederacy was collapsed. But I honor the Copperheads. To me, the Copperheads are one of the great groups in American history. The Copperheads were the pro-Southern Northerners, were against the war, wanted to negotiate a peace. My particular hero was Charles O'Connor, who was an Irish Catholic, the head of the New York City Bar, distinguished lawyer, who was Jefferson Davis's lawyer for his treason trial, which never came about after the war, and he was a libertarian, paleo-libertarian to the hilt. He was a great guy, and he was of course very anti-war. New York City almost seceded from the North during the war. Mayor Fernando Wood wanted to secede and free trade with the South. There was a sound sentiment. There was big draft riots in New York to attack the draft, which went on for days. Another heroic libertarian gesture. So and by the way, Charles O'Connor, toward the end of his life, when the Democratic Party, his beloved party, picked Horace Greeley of all things, an idiot and a socialist and a protectionist, picked Horace Greeley as the presidential candidate. Connor formed a straight Democrat ticket in 1972, ran for president. Nobody's ever written on this. I don't think one historian has ever written on this great ticket. At any rate, so that's Lincoln and what else did the Republican Party do when they took over? In addition to butchery, of course, they took advantage of the more or less one-party Congress to push through the entire Whig Republican economic program. High tariffs, I've said already, huge railroad land grants, railroad subsidies, sin taxes on alcohol and tobacco. It's the beginning, that's the Puritan motif. You can't imagine how cheap liquor was before the Civil War. You can't imagine it. A gallon of good scotch for 20 cents or something. Forget about price inflation. It was magnificent. He ruined that. The income tax for the first time in American history, the monstrous income tax levied by Lincoln, and first paper money, fiat money, and nationalizing the banking system. Every rotten thing you could think of was done by Lincoln. Plus the conscription comes in a huge scale, massive conscription to get these poor people to fight. The right of habeas corpus was suspended, arrest of dissenters, civil liberties were attacked, everything else. The whole thing was absolutely monstrous. When I heard, by the way, it's interesting, when I heard that my old friend, the late Mel Bradford, was denied the post of National Endowment for Humanities chairman early in the Reagan administration because he was anti-Lincoln, which made him a fascist. I couldn't believe, what do you mean? Lincoln was the first big fascist. What are they doing about? So, on the religion, I just want to say about Lincoln, on the religious front, I don't think Lincoln was very religious. But he went along with the culture. He was apparently very sober and stern. He was personally opposed to alcohol and tobacco. And he was opposed to the private carrying of guns, by the way, one of the first gun controllers. He was also, of course, running for president since almost his early adulthood. He also acted viciously toward his own humble family in Kentucky. He repudiated his entire family, refused to have anything to do with them. He dumped his fiancée to marry a wealthier girl, Mary Todd, whose family were friends of Henry Clay, coming up here with the guillotine. He repudiates his own family, but then the whole world becomes his family, right? The Union becomes his god, the mystical Union. As a matter of fact, he prefigured our own beloved Mario Cuomo in New York by declaring the Union was really a family, bound indissolubly together by the most intimate organic bonds. He repudiates his own family, and he takes the Union, this non-existent thing out there, as his family. This is, I think, typical of liberalism in action. That's what it is. So, and the difference, I think, between the British and the North, again, the British were at least loyal to an existing person, the king. That was there, was at least coherent. The North was loyal, engaged in this monstrous war of plunder and mass murder and destruction and assault of women and all the rest of it, in allegiance to a mystical, non-existent entity, the Union, which was totally illogical, totally absurd. This becomes the god of the North. There's no heresy greater and no political theory more pernicious than sacralizing the secular, make a secular institution a divine entity. So this is okay. To conclude, the war in this war between the states, it seems clear to me that the South fought for its sacred honor. No question about that. For an honorable war. The Northern War, however, was very opposite of honorable. Remember the care about international law. The North targeted civilians, and targeted women, and targeted civilians. First off, it destroyed civilian life, it destroyed civilian institutions. Sherman's infamous march through Georgia, which is part of it, just the most famous part of this. The idea is to starve and kill the South into submission. So by targeting and butchering civilians, Lincoln and Grant and Sherman paved the way for all the genocidal horrors of the monstrous 20th century. There's been a lot of talk in recent years about memory, about never forgetting, capital N, capital F, about history's retroactive punishment for crimes of war and mass murder. The great libertarian historian Lord Acton put it, the historian, the last analysis must be a moral judge. The muse of the historian, he wrote, is not Cleo, but Rhadamanthus, the legendary avenger of innocent blood. All right, in that spirit, we must always remember, we must never forget, we must put it in the dock and hang higher than Haman, those who in modern times opened the Pandora's box of genocide and extermination of civilians, Sherman, Grant, and Lincoln. Perhaps someday their statues, like Lenin's in Russia, will be toppled and melted down. Their insignias and battle flags will be desecrated. Their war songs tossed into the flame. And then Davis and Lee and Jackson and Forrest and all the heroes of the South, Dixie and the Stars and Bars will once again be truly honored and remembered. The classic comment on that meretricious TV series, that rotten series of Civil War, was made by that marvelous and feisty great Southern writer Florence King, one of my favorite writers. Asked her views on the series, she replied, "I didn't have time to watch the Civil War. I'm too busy getting ready for the next one." In that spirit, I'm sure that one day, aided and abetted by Northerners like myself in the glorious Copperhead tradition, the South shall rise again. Thank you.